What if I told you that most of your fears aren't yours, that your guilt, your shame, your emotional triggers were planted in you long before you ever had a chance to think for yourself? What if your entire identity, the way you respond to love, conflict, rejection, boundaries, wasn't shaped by who you are, but by who they trained you to be? This is the truth most people never question. You didn't just grow up in a family, you were programmed by it. You inherited more than just blood. You inherited emotional patterns, scripts, conditioning, and it didn't start with you. It started generations before you, passed down silently, invisibly, powerfully. Through gestures, through silence, through expectations disguised as love, through trauma disguised as tradition. They taught you not to speak up. They taught you to put others first, even if it kills you inside. They taught you that emotions are weakness, that self-sacrifice is virtue, that love must come with guilt, obligation, and self-erasure. And you didn't question it. Because how could you? You were just a child, trying to survive in a system that called its chains love. So you absorbed it. You repeated it. You carry it, but you don't have to carry it forever. Because recognizing the script is the first step to rewriting it, and rewriting it is your key to freedom. You react without knowing why. You apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. You feel guilty for setting boundaries. You suppress your truth because your nervous system was trained to fear being authentic. You react without knowing why. You apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. You feel guilty for setting boundaries. You suppress your truth because your nervous system was trained to fear being authentic. But you don't have to carry this forever. Recognizing the script is the first step to rewriting it. And rewriting it is your key to freedom. This is generational emotional conditioning, and if you don't face it, you'll keep living a life that doesn't belong to you, a life shaped by ghosts you've never met, a life where your reactions aren't your own. But here's the truth. You don't break free through rebellion. You break free through awareness. Because when you can see the script, you can rewrite it. And when you can feel the pattern, you can choose not to follow it. In this video, we're going to expose the hidden emotional programs passed down through family systems, decode how they control your adult behavior, and most importantly, teach you how to dismantle them piece by piece. This is not about healing. This is about liberation, mental sovereignty, emotional clarity, and freedom from a legacy that was never yours to carry. Let's begin. Part 1. What is generational emotional conditioning? You weren't just born into a family. You were born into a system designed to shape your behavior before you ever had the power to choose. Most people think trauma is loud, obvious, violent, but the most dangerous trauma is subtle, cultural, emotional, inherited. It doesn't scream, it whispers, over years, over generations, until it becomes a voice inside your head, disguised as your own. That voice that says, don't speak up, don't upset anyone, always put others first. That's not intuition, that's programming. It's called generational emotional conditioning. It's the silent legacy passed down through bloodlines, not through genes, but through emotional scripts, unquestioned beliefs, emotional reactions, behavioral patterns that feel natural only because they were rehearsed over and over, and you never knew it was happening, because the conditioning began before you could even speak. You were taught what emotions are acceptable and which ones must be buried. You were taught what love looks like, even if it was control. You were taught that suffering equals loyalty, that self-abandonment equals goodness, that silence equals strength. But none of this is real wisdom. It's inherited dysfunction. Passed down not because it's true, but because no one before you had the courage to question it. And now it lives in you. In the way you shrink in relationships, in the guilt you feel for saying no, in the fear that being seen will lead to rejection. And here's the dangerous part. Because it feels familiar, you assume it's right. But familiarity is not truth. It's repetition. It's exposure. It's emotional residue from a system that needed you to conform, not awaken. Generational conditioning isn't just about family behavior. It's about psychological control. A control so invisible, most people die never realizing they were never truly free. Until one person decides to stop the cycle, to look at the invisible, to feel what was suppressed, to unlearn what was inherited, and that person is you. Part 2. How emotional scripts get installed in childhood. A child doesn't just grow up. A child is coded, not with logic, but with emotional scripts, delivered silently, unconsciously, repeatedly, and it happens early. Long before you understand language, your nervous system starts absorbing emotional patterns. Your brain watches, your body remembers, and your identity begins to take shape through every glance, every silence, every subtle punishment. No one had to scream, no one had to hit, they just had to repeat the script until it became your truth. You're too sensitive. Don't talk back. Be grateful even if you're hurting. Don't make things difficult. Keep the peace. Each phrase becomes a command line, written directly into your subconscious. But it's not just words, it's emotional reactions. When you expressed sadness and they ignored you, your system learned sadness equals danger. When you showed anger and they punished you, your system learned anger equals rejection. When you set a boundary and they withdrew love, your system learned boundaries equals abandonment. These are not just memories, they are emotional associations, and they are powerful. Because from that moment forward, you no longer express what you feel, you express what is safe. You start editing yourself, not to be authentic, but to be accepted. And it doesn't stop in childhood. That code follows you into adulthood. You fear being honest because honesty was punished. You overextend yourself because saying no used to come with guilt. You suppress needs because you were trained to believe that your needs are a burden. This is why people repeat the same patterns, not because they're weak, but because their subconscious is loyal to the script they were given. They sabotage intimacy. They chase emotionally unavailable partners. They overperform and still feel unworthy. And they don't know why, because they think it's just who they are. But it's not personality, it's programming. And once you understand how those scripts got installed, you start gaining the power to erase them. Because what was written into you without your permission can be overwritten with your awareness. So now we know the roles that were imposed on us, roles that dictated our responses and behavior. But the true danger lies in how these roles leave lasting marks on our subconscious. Let's explore how these seemingly innocent labels become deeply embedded in our minds and begin controlling our adult lives. Part 3. The cost of carrying what's not yours. You're carrying emotions that don't belong to you. You just don't know it yet. Inherited guilt, inherited shame, inherited fear of speaking, of resting, of saying no, These aren't personal flaws. They're emotional hand-me-downs, passed from parent to child, from generation to generation, until they became part of you, like a scar you never questioned. But what happens when you carry what's not yours? You feel guilt every time you choose yourself. You feel shame every time you set a boundary. You feel fear every time you move away from what the system expects. But you are not a prisoner to this legacy. You are the one who sets yourself free. And the moment you decide to put down what's not yours, you start reclaiming the life you were always meant to live. A life full of possibilities, choices, and true self-empowerment. Why? Because you were conditioned to believe that being true to yourself is betrayal. You weren't taught to be free. You were trained to be useful, to serve emotional roles in the family system, even if it meant erasing your truth. You became the peacemaker, the fixer, the self-sacrificer. Not because it's who you are, but because it's what kept you safe. And now, even as an adult, you still live in those roles, not by choice, but by loyalty to invisible rules. That's the cost of carrying inherited conditioning. You live a life that's not yours, but feels familiar. You choose relationships that mirror your past pain, because pain feels like home. You sabotage your own peace, because you were trained to associate chaos with love. You shrink in moments of power, because your subconscious equates visibility with danger. And here's the most dangerous part. You think it's you. You think something's wrong with you, but it's not you. It's the emotional residue of a system that conditioned you to believe that suffering equals virtue. You were not born to carry this. You were trained to carry it. And now, it's time to put it down. Because until you recognize what's not yours, you'll keep apologizing for being different. You'll keep feeling guilty for being free. You'll keep sabotaging every attempt to rise just to stay emotionally loyal to your bloodline. But you owe them nothing. Not your silence, not your obedience, not your suffering. You owe yourself one thing: liberation. Now that we've uncovered how these emotional scripts shape our behaviors, it's time to examine what happens when we unknowingly carry these beliefs into adulthood. How do these inherited feelings of guilt and shame sabotage our potential? And more importantly, how can we finally break free? Part Bon. How to identify and interrupt the emotional cycle. Chapter 552. You cannot break a cycle you can't see, and you cannot fight a pattern you haven't named. That's why the first step in liberation is exposure. Exposure to the truth. Exposure to the hidden code running beneath your life. So how do you identify the emotional conditioning that's been driving you? Simple. Look at your automatic reactions. Do you feel guilty when you say no? Do you feel responsible for others' emotions? Do you feel unsafe when you speak your truth? Do you shrink when you need to be seen? These are not quirks. They are emotional reflexes, programmed by repetition, not truth. Ask yourself, where did I learn this reaction? Who taught me that this emotion is dangerous? Whose approval am I still chasing in silence? You'll begin to see it clearly. The voice inside your head isn't yours, it's inherited. That fear of confrontation, that shame around boundaries, that impulse to fix others before you fix yourself, none of it began with you. But all of it now lives in you. And here's the turning point. When you can name the pattern, you weaken its grip, because your subconscious thrives on autopilot. But the moment you bring conscious attention, the program glitches. You disrupt the loop. You break the trance. That's how you interrupt the emotional cycle. Pause the reaction. When guilt rises, don't obey. Observe. Name the origin. Say it aloud. This isn't me, it's conditioning. Choose the opposite behavior, set the boundary, speak the truth, walk away, repeat until reprogrammed. The brain rewires through action, not theory. Yes, it feels uncomfortable at first, because the system inside you will resist. But discomfort is not danger. It's just unfamiliar territory. You're not betraying your family. You're just stepping out of the psychological prison they built because they didn't know better. And now, you do. Part 5. Reprogramming your emotional identity. Breaking the cycle isn't enough. You must build something stronger in its place. Because if you don't consciously reprogram your identity, the old code will sneak back in. Familiar emotions will feel safer than freedom. And your subconscious will pull you back to what it once called home. So how do you rewrite your emotional identity? You don't do it through theory. You do it through repetition, resistance, and clarity. Step 1. Create your new emotional truth. Ask yourself, what beliefs do I want to install in my nervous system? What emotions do I want to normalize in my identity? Write new codes. I am not responsible for anyone's emotions, but my own. I do not owe guilt to prove love. My boundaries are sacred, not selfish. I can feel without apologizing. I can speak without shrinking. Step 2. Anchor those beliefs into behavior. Every time you feel guilt, act from clarity instead. Every time you feel fear, speak anyway. Every time the old identity shows up, pause, breathe, override. For instance, imagine this. You're invited to a family gathering, and your parents expect you to drop everything to attend, even though you've been overwhelmed and need rest. In the past, you would have said yes, but now you set a boundary. You politely decline, knowing that self-care is a priority. You no longer feel the guilt that once came with saying no, because you've reprogrammed yourself to honor your own needs. It's not about being fearless. It's about being self-loyal. Step 3. Rewire your environment. Surround yourself with mirrors of the new identity, not echoes of the old. Distance from people who reinforce your past programming. Move closer to spaces that affirm your evolution. Your subconscious learns faster from repetition than logic. So don't explain your change. Live it, show it, rehearse it. Step 4. Accept emotional withdrawal symptoms. Yes, healing from emotional conditioning feels like detox. You'll feel empty, isolated, uncertain. Because when guilt no longer drives you, clarity feels uncomfortable. When you stop shrinking, your own power will feel unfamiliar. But stay with it. You're not falling apart. You're just leaving a false identity that was never yours to begin with. Step 5. Reaffirm your sovereignty every day. Speak it. Feel it. Own it. You are not the emotional slave of a broken system. You are not the echo of a fearful generation. You are not the silent inheritor of guilt. You are the pattern breaker, the emotional architect, the programmer of your own identity. The final break. You are not their legacy. You are your own creation. You were not born to carry their emotional debt. You were not born to repeat their silence. You were not born to bleed for systems that never truly saw you. You were born to choose, to awaken, to interrupt the cycle that ran through generations before you ever took your first breath. And now, you are. You've seen the scripts. You've questioned the reflexes. You've felt the weight of emotional inheritance. And you've decided it ends here. That decision alone makes you powerful. Because most people don't question the pain, They normalize it. They call it culture. They call it duty. They call it love. But you didn't. You called it out. You faced the shadows. You stood in the fire of guilt and didn't flinch. That's not just healing. That's rebellion. That's sovereignty. And yes, there will be resistance. They will tell you you've changed. They'll say you've become distant, cold, harsh. Let them, because you're not here to maintain illusions. You're here to reclaim your mind. And when you walk out of the emotional prison they built, don't look back. Don't explain. Don't negotiate your freedom. You owe no one a version of yourself that was born from guilt. You are no longer reacting. You are choosing. No longer apologizing for your truth. No longer seeking permission to be whole. No longer running outdated emotional software. You are now fully installed, with clarity, with strength, with presence. This is what it means to be emotionally sovereign. To feel without fear, to act without guilt, to live without inherited shame. You are not their legacy. You are your own creation. And this is the version of you they could never control. Now, walk forward, not as a reaction to your past, but as the blueprint of a future no one before you had the courage to build. You are the final break, the one the system didn't see coming, the one who ends what others only survived. This is not evolution. This is revolution, and it starts with you.